Welcome to Understanding the Numbers section of Keep Your Cash. You know, this section is incredibly important for you to really deep dive into how do we calculate numbers. And we want to walk you step by step through the most important pieces of making sure you're keeping as much cash as possible. So let's dive in. As you've heard in previous sections, we talked about the importance of applications becoming a policy and clients paying for a policy for 12 months. And what we do with these two elements are what we showcase to you in what we call as our take-in rate and persistency. Now I'm going to dive into the persistency about that 12 months here in a minute, but those analogies and those concepts really play true in making sure you're keeping all the cash possible when you run your business. And so let's dive in first to understanding take-in rate. Now, take-in rate is simple. It's the percentage of submitted applications that become a policy over the last 17 months. Now, with that, the idea is that take-in rate simply is how well can you turn applications into policies, right? And we look at it over a 17-month time period. Now, a good goal, somebody always asks to say, hey, Steve, what's a good goal? And I would tell you as high as possible. But if it starts to get below 85%, I would tell you you have areas of improvement to being able to look at your take-in rate. But there's some pieces that I want to make sure you understand and how that calculates, number one. But then number two is making sure you understand some of the different dynamics that plays out in take-in rate. So let's dive into a quick example of how we would calculate a take-in rate. So if over 17 months you had over 100 applications, and let's just say 85 of them have become a policy, your take-in rate is a simple fraction, right? It's 85 over 100 or 85%. Now, a couple of the things that you need to know is that when you do a take-in rate, any policy that is still pending counts as a good guy, right? If there hasn't been a negative action yet, and we'll talk about that later, we count that as a good application. It would still be a part of the 100 applications. We're only looking at 15 or so in this example that have already had some type of a negative action. Now, there are some there's places where we need to make sure you understand what could be some concerns when we see somebody's take-in rate drop significantly. Now, one of the things that we do as a company is that we'll look at a RVP's through third take-in rate, right? And if that take-in rate drops below 71%, we change an RVP's advance rate from 75% to 50%. This really is to be able to say, hey, there's something going wrong with your applications turning to a policy. We need to get your attention. We need you to focus on this part of your business to make sure you can fix whatever is happening in your business. Now, I want to make sure you understand, though, that having a take-in rate moved from 75% to a 50% does not actually change how much money you make. All it affects is the timing of when you get the money. So instead of giving 9 months up front and in advance, you would only get 6 months up front in advance. And then on month 7, you would get paid earns through that process. And so this is a key example for making sure you understand how take-in rate really can impact your business. Now, I always tell somebody that take-in rate really shows me what's happening on the front end of their business, making sure they're doing the sales process correctly, all the pieces that are out there, and making sure they're using the tools properly that they have to protect their take-in rate. The biggest tool you have to protect your take-in rate is COD, right? A COD exception is that the times when we won't have a negative action against you on your take-in rate is that if you send in an application to home office and you say, hey, I don't know if this application is going to get approved, and so therefore I sent it in COD with no money. You may have, home office may have suggested to send in it COD, and what that does is let's just say that policy or that application ends up getting declined. We won't hold that that decline against you in your negative action. So COD is your friend, and when you have cases that you're not sure if it will actually get accepted to home office, we're going to dive into making sure you're utilizing COD in a future segment on Keep Your Cash. But now let's jump over into persistency. This is something that I believe a lot of RVPs are confused on. They don't understand all the dynamics of it. And as we first started talking about the making sure a client is paying their policy for 12 months, I really want you to understand that that is to make sure you get every dollar you deserve from a compensation standpoint. But as an RVP or a future RVP, we calculate persistency using a 13-month calculation. Now, we look at if a client has made their premium payments over 13 months, and we want to see that on a 17-month average. Now, this is the place where a lot of RVPs get confused because they're thinking it's over 17 months of all the policies, and they say, nope, we're only looking at if a policy has been issued and has been paid for 13 months over a 17-month period. And so that's a key piece of it. So let's use an example to see how we would calculate it. Let's now look at, because persistency is focused on policies staying in force, right? And so if we had 85 policies that were accepted and the client took them, and over that 13-month period, right, how many of them were still in a premium paying status? And let's just say out of 85, 77 were there. And that means that the persistency is 90%, there to be able to dive into. This is important to know, right? You should have a goal as having a highest persistency as possible, because this is really showing you if you're getting paid for the work that you're doing. But there are some downfalls that if you're not keeping your persistency high enough, that there are some downfalls that will impact you in your compensation. And so on this screen that you'll see is the minimum persistency required is 79.01% to receive full base shop overrides. You see, if your persistency drops below 79.01%, we will actually reduce your commissions from we'll use the 110% contract for an example, is that you'll go from an RVP getting paid 110% contract down to a 95% contract. And if you continue to drop your levels in persistency, if you drop below 77%, you'll actually get paid as a senior regional leader. And by the way, what that means is if you have a senior regional leader in your base shop and you've reduced your comp to a senior regional, there is no override between you and that senior regional. So it's incredibly important for you to make sure you're paying attention to your persistency. These are the two key pieces. Now, how do we calculate QBI? Because everybody always wants to talk about QBI. And so let's talk about how we calculate QBI. It's pretty simple. We look at your taken rate, we multiply it by your persistency rate, and that's your QBI. So in a simple form, we look at taken rate, which is your ability to turn applications into policies. We multiply that on how well you keep your policies in force over 13 months, and that tells you your QBI. But here's the challenge. I typically never look at somebody's QBI to see if something's going on. The reason is you could actually have a really good taken rate and a poor persistency, and you could be hiding behind a decent QBI. And so anytime I look at somebody's business, I really want to look at both the numbers. But let's give you that quick example of what it would look like on how we would calculate it in the example that we've played out. So if you had that 85% taken rate and you multiplied that times your 90.58% persistency rate, then you come up with a 76.99% QBI. But I will warn you once again, it's not about the QBI. You need to go underneath and see what's going on with my taken rate, what's happening with my persistency. You see, it's important for you not just to understand how to submit business on the front end, but it's also important to make sure you're tracking your efficiencies on the back end. So the takeaway question I want you to look at from this section is, how well do you know how good your taken rate is, ability to turn applications to policies, or your persistency is to be able to have your policies staying in force for you to run your business to make the most profit as possible.